Hello, my name is Albert Yang. I will be introducing the two types of double closing for today. The two types of double closings are the wet double close and the dry double close. We will start with the traditional wet double close. The wet double close, also known as traditional double close. Here we have three parties involved: the seller, Party A, wholesaler, Party B, and the buyer, Party C. So in the traditional wet double close, the wholesaler gets the property under contract from seller A. Wholesaler B sells the property to buyer C. What happens at a wet closing? At closing, seller sells to wholesaler B. Wholesaler B brings the money to the closing table. Seller officially sells to wholesaler B. That in and of itself is a self-contained transaction. Seller sells to wholesaler B. Wholesaler B holds the title for a few seconds, maybe even up to a day, until wholesaler B sells to buyer C. So in order of deeding the property, seller A deeds to wholesaler B. Wholesaler B then deeds to buyer C. So the deed chain looks like this: seller A to wholesaler B to buyer C. In terms of money, wholesaler B brings money to the table and pays seller A, so B to A. And in the second transaction, which is between wholesaler B and buyer C brings the money to the table and pays wholesaler B, so it's C to B. So the money chain goes B to A, then C to B. Note that most of the time a good title company will only charge you once for closing instead of double closing and paying the title insurance twice. They might charge you a little bit for some closing paperwork, docs, and fees, but generally will not charge you twice, or should not charge you twice, for holding the title in their own title company for only a few seconds. The smart way then is for the wholesaler to shed the seller costs to seller A and the buyer costs to buyer C, so the wholesaler incurs little to no title costs. On a side note, there are plenty of companies and individuals who will give you transactional funding, lending that to wholesaler B. Oftentimes, wholesaler B, doing a wet double close, will borrow money for transactional funding. Customarily, this is at about 1% for the borrowing, usually about a day, no more than 2 or 3. So that was wet double closing. That was very straightforward and traditional. So today we'll talk about the dry double close. The dry double close, aka also known as the out of order closing, we still have the same parties involved. And even though we know the title company was involved in the wet double closing, I will explicitly inject the title company in here to give you an idea of what the title company does or is part of the job of the title company in a dry double close. Oftentimes, companies such as Stewart Title will not do dry double closes. So check with your title company first to see whether or not they will do a dry double close. And also, in most states that allow dry double closes, not all states do, but Texas is a state that does allow dry double close with some caveats, namely a disclosure to seller A telling them that the funds will not be coming from wholesaler B, but will be coming from a third party, in this case, buyer C. So with that out of the way, wholesaler B gets the property under contract with seller A and then turns around and sells the property to buyer C. At closing, however, seller A is selling to wholesaler B, but wholesaler B does not bring any money to the table. So technically, because wholesaler B has not brought money to the table, seller A has not technically sold to wholesaler B yet. So it's a quasi-sale. Wholesaler B doesn't own the property, so it's also a quasi-sale to buyer C. And that is because both parties are dependent on buyer C bringing money to the table. Let me elaborate. On the order of money, buyer C will bring the money to the table. The title company, in this case, will divide up buyer C's money. First amount will be how much wholesaler B owes to seller A. The title company will take money from buyer C and pay off seller A with that portion of the money. Minus title costs and other expenses, whatever amount is left over then goes to wholesaler B. So the wholesaler B in this case is not bringing any money to the table. All the money that is used to pay seller A as well as wholesaler B is coming strictly from buyer C. A lot of title companies will not allow this because when you open escrow between seller A and wholesaler B, that has its own escrow account and GF number. When you have a contract between wholesaler B and buyer C, that is a separate transaction that has its own escrow account and GF number. So in this case, you are doing everything aka out of order. Unlike the wet closing, a dry closing means that you technically are selling from seller A to wholesaler B to buyer C, but wholesaler B actually has not received title yet, and that is because seller A has not received money yet. So order of deeding, seller A deeds to wholesaler B only after seller A has received funds from buyer C. So the deed will go from A to B. Wholesaler B then deeds to buyer C, B to C. So the deed will look like A to B to C, but realistically it looks like money from buyer C, goes to seller A. Seller A then deeds to B, and then B deeds to C. Technically, then whatever is left over, title company will give to B. But we always say seller A will deed whenever wholesaler B deed to wholesaler B only after they've received money from buyer C. Now, a quick word of caution. Seller A does not need to know the identity of buyer C. All they really need to know is that the money and the funds will not be coming from wholesaler B's account. It will be coming from a third-party account. At no time should your title company be disclosing who buyer C is to seller A. The reason why is, in this case, a seller may then elect to say, if buyer B is paying me, then why don't I sell to buyer C directly, bypassing wholesaler B? Now, wholesaler B and seller A have a contract, so if seller A does do this, it would be in violation of the contract between seller A and wholesaler B. But you're then landing yourself into litigation country. And so what we really want to do is make sure that we want to stay compliant with the state laws of your particular state. Generally, there will be a disclosure between buyer C or a disclosure to seller A stating that the funds will not come from wholesaler B. But generally, there is no state, at least not in Texas, that states that the identity of buyer B has to be revealed to seller A. Upon seller A receiving money from C, then they will deed to B. So A will deed to B only after C has paid them. I hope this was somewhat clear as far as the difference between a wet double close and a dry double close. If you have any questions, please contact me. Here's my contact information. You can add me with the QR code there. And I hope you enjoyed the presentation.